The blood oath of the forgotten pharaoh. The tomb in the Valley of Shadows. The Egyptian desert was a place where time itself seemed to stand still. The endless waves of sand shimmered beneath the merciless sun, whispering with the wind, as if carrying secrets too old to be spoken aloud. To many, the desert was nothing more than barren wasteland, but to Professor Daniel Ashford, it was a library. Every dune, every rock, every fragment of broken pottery was a page waiting to be read. Daniel adjusted his wide-brimmed hat as he stood atop a ridge, surveying the expanse before him. Behind him, his excavation team labored under the weight of crates, cameras, and supplies, setting up the camp against the cliffs. This wasn't just another expedition. For months, Daniel had been chasing whispers, rumors of a pharaoh who had been wiped from existence, deliberately erased from history. No cartouches, no monuments, no records, only fragments of warnings written by terrified priests who dared not even record his name. The tablet that had led him here was unlike any other he had studied. Found in a hidden chamber beneath Karnak Temple, it had been inscribed in red ochre, not black ink, its hieroglyphs crude and jagged, as though carved in haste. The translation was chilling. Beware the one who drank the blood of kings. The pharaoh without a name was cast into the Valley of Shadows. His oath binds him still. Disturb not his rest, lest Egypt weep again. Most scholars dismissed it as apocryphal nonsense. A forgotten myth, no more real than the tales of serpent gods and winged beasts. But Daniel couldn't ignore it. The Valley of Shadows, it wasn't on any map, yet the tablet hinted at a canyon beyond the Valley of the Kings, where the cliffs curved inward to conceal a hidden passage. It was Nadia El-Sayed, his colleague and guide, who found the trail. Nadia was not just a historian. She was Egyptian to her core, her lineage stretching back to priestly families who had served in Thebes. She had grown up listening to the old stories her grandmother told, stories others dismissed as superstition. When Daniel showed her the tablet, she paled but agreed to help. Now, standing beside him on the ridge, Nadia's sharp eyes scanned the horizon. "Do you feel it, Professor?" she asked softly. Daniel frowned. "Feel what?" "The silence. No birds, no jackals. Even the wind is quieter here." She drew her scarf tighter around her head. "Places that fear themselves, they carry a weight." Daniel didn't want to admit it, but she was right. The desert was never truly silent. There was always the distant cry of a hawk, the shifting of sand, the creak of rock under the sun's heat. But here, nothing, just a suffocating stillness. They pressed forward into the canyon, the cliffs rising higher and higher on either side until the sun was a narrow blade of light above. The air grew cooler, shadows stretching long and black. At last, the passage widened into a bowl-shaped hollow, where sand had piled thick over the centuries. And there it was. Half buried beneath dunes stood the weathered remains of a structure, a pyramid, but not like the grand monuments of Giza. This one was squat, its apex broken, its stones blackened as though scorched. No inscriptions decorated its surface. Only the entrance was visible, sealed with a massive slab of stone. Across it were etched hieroglyphs the color of dried blood. Nadia's breath caught. Red script, "This is no ordinary tomb." Daniel knelt to study the markings, brushing sand away with careful strokes. His eyes widened as he read aloud. "Here lies he who shall not be named. His crown shattered, his soul bound. Enter not, for the oath of blood is eternal." The team murmured uneasily behind them. Ahmed, one of the workers, crossed himself and muttered a prayer. "We should leave this place. The ancients sealed it for a reason." Daniel forced a smile. "Every tomb was sealed for a reason, Ahmed. If Howard Carter had listened to warnings, we'd never have discovered Tutankhamun." But even as he said it, a chill crawled down his spine. There was something about these warnings that felt different. They weren't glorifications of the afterlife. They were desperate, fearful. Work began the next day. The stone slab sealing the entrance was massive, but with levers, pulleys, and patient labor, the team chipped away at the sand-packed edges. Strange things began to happen almost immediately. Tools went missing, only to be found buried in places no one had touched. A tent collapsed in the night, though there was no wind. One worker swore he heard whispers in the dark, voices calling his name. By the third night, even Daniel couldn't ignore it. He lay awake in his tent, staring at the canvas ceiling, listening to the faint rustle outside. It wasn't the sound of wind. It was breathing, slow, heavy, just outside the tent flap. Gathering his courage, he thrust it open with a lantern in hand. Nothing, only the desert, vast and still. But when he turned back, he noticed something carved into the sand near his tent, a hieroglyph of an eye, staring upward. Freshly drawn. The next morning, they broke through. The slab shifted with a groan, releasing a gust of stale air that reeked of iron and rot. Everyone gagged, covering their mouths. Daniel shone a flashlight into the darkness, revealing a long descending passage. The walls were smooth, but streaked with something darker than dust. Stains that looked disturbingly like dried blood. The deeper they went, the colder the air grew. Torches flickered, their flames shrinking as if reluctant to burn here. Hieroglyphs covered the walls, but unlike the celebratory inscriptions of other tombs, these were chaotic, scribbled prayers, curses, and invocations. Finally, they entered the burial chamber. It was vast, the ceiling lost in darkness. At its center stood the sarcophagus. But this was no ordinary coffin. It was made of black basalt, veined with crimson streaks that seemed to pulse faintly in the torchlight. And unlike any other sarcophagus Daniel had ever seen, this one was bound with chains. Thick iron chains, rusted but unbroken, wrapped around it in a lattice, secured with heavy seals shaped like scarabs. The team stood frozen, awestruck and horrified. Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper. "In all my years, I've never seen anything like this." Nadia's face was pale. "This is not a burial, it is a prison." At that moment, the torches flared violently, then dimmed, plunging the chamber into near darkness. And from somewhere deep inside the sarcophagus came a sound. A faint, deliberate sound. 3 knocks. The pharaoh without a name. The sound of the 3 knocks echoed through the chamber, deep and resonant, vibrating in the bones of every person present. The workers stumbled back, clutching their amulets, whispering frantic prayers. Nadia's face was pale, her hand gripping Daniel's arm tightly. "It can't be," she whispered. "It's been thousands of years." Daniel forced himself to swallow his fear. Rationality was his anchor. "It's just shifting stone," he said, though the words sounded hollow even to himself. But deep down, he knew stone did not knock in rhythm. The sarcophagus stood there, chained and ominous, as though it were aware of their presence. Daniel approached, his flashlight trembling in his hand. He brushed dust from the seals, ancient scarabs carved in lapis and gold, symbols of warding and protection. He recognized the glyph for blood oath etched repeatedly along the chains. Nadia leaned close, whispering. This pharaoh, he was not buried as a king. He was bound, his soul chained so it could not rise. The priests must have performed a binding ritual, one reserved only for the most dangerous of the cursed. But why erase his name from history? Daniel muttered. Kings were damned, hated, even overthrown, but they were recorded. To erase a name completely, he trailed off, realizing the weight of it. That means they feared even his memory. The workers refused to go further. Ahmed, their foreman, threw down his tools. "No treasure is worth this. You bring death on all of us." He and several others fled, leaving only a skeleton crew behind. Daniel tried to reassure the rest, but unease spread like a disease. That night, the camp was restless. The wind picked up, carrying with it what sounded like distant chanting. The workers huddled close to the fires, too afraid to sleep. Daniel sat in his tent, poring over his notes. He could not shake the feeling that something was watching him. Near midnight, Nadia rushed in. "Daniel, you have to see this." He followed her to the tomb. Inside the burial chamber, the sarcophagus glowed faintly. The crimson streaks in the black basalt pulsed like veins carrying blood. And across the lid, fresh hieroglyphs were seared into the stone, smoking faintly as if burned by fire. Nadia translated in a trembling voice, "The oath is not broken. My reign is eternal. Blood will answer blood." Suddenly, one of the scarab seals cracked. A shard fell to the floor with a sharp clink that echoed in the silence. Daniel staggered back. "That's impossible. These seals are thousands of years old, they can't just." A sound cut him off. A whisper, not from the walls, from inside the coffin. It was not a single voice. It was many, layered, overlapping, chanting in a language older than the pyramids themselves. Nadia grabbed his arm. "We should leave, tonight, before the other seals break." But Daniel couldn't. This was the discovery of a lifetime, greater than Tutankhamun, greater than Ramses. A forgotten pharaoh, bound by blood, erased from history. If they left now, someone else would find it, and Daniel's name would vanish into obscurity. His obsession grew over the following days. He recorded every detail, every glyph, every crack in the chains. Nadia begged him to stop, but he was consumed. He began dreaming of the pharaoh, visions of a man with a golden crown shaped like coiled serpents, his eyes black pits, his hands dripping red. In the dreams, the pharaoh whispered, "Release me, and I will show you eternity." The team's morale collapsed. Tools shattered without reason. Fires refused to stay lit. One worker was found catatonic, his eyes wide, his mouth whispering, "He is awake. He is awake." Another vanished entirely, his tracks leading straight into the desert before ending abruptly. By the fifth night, only Daniel, Nadia, and two loyal assistants remained. That was when the second seal broke. This time, it shattered violently, sending fragments across the chamber. The chains rattled, as though something inside was straining against them. The chanting grew louder, echoing in the chamber though no source could be seen. Then came the smell, the sickly stench of blood and rot, thick and suffocating. Nadia grabbed Daniel by the shoulders, her voice fierce. "Listen to me. This isn't just history. This is a prison." The priests bound him with blood because he made an oath to consume the life of his enemies and live forever. He drank blood, Daniel. He was no man. He was something else. Daniel's hands trembled, but he whispered, almost to himself, "What if it's true? What if he did live forever? What if we're standing on the brink of proving immortality?" At that, Nadia's expression hardened. "And at what cost? You've seen the signs. This isn't immortality, it's damnation." That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The whispering was constant now, curling through his mind like smoke. "One more seal, and I am free. Break it, and you will be remembered for eternity." At dawn, he stood in the chamber, staring at the last scarab seal. His hand hovered over it. His entire career, his entire life, had led to this moment. Fame, glory, immortality, it was all within reach. Nadia's voice echoed in the chamber behind him. "Daniel, please, don't." He turned. She stood there, eyes filled with fear and sorrow. And then, with a sound like a thunderclap, the third and final seal cracked. The chains fell away. The lid of the sarcophagus shifted, grinding slowly open, releasing a wave of darkness so heavy it seemed to extinguish the torches. The chamber filled with a sound, a low, guttural growl that was not human. And from within the coffin, a hand emerged. Blackened, skeletal, yet dripping with fresh blood. The forgotten pharaoh had awakened. The blood oath awakens. The chamber was suffocating with silence, broken only by the grinding of stone as the coffin's lid slid further open. Daniel stumbled backward, his torch shaking in his grip, its flame flickering violently. Nadia clutched an amulet around her neck, muttering prayers in Arabic, her eyes never leaving the sarcophagus. From within, the figure rose, half flesh, half shadow. His skin was blackened like burned parchment, yet glistened with fresh blood as if he had been born again in that moment. A golden headdress clung to his skull, adorned with rubies that seemed to pulse like living hearts. His eyes were pits of darkness, but inside them burned red embers that cut through the gloom. The workers screamed. One dropped his lantern, the flame sputtering out as the chamber plunged into almost total darkness. The only light came from the pharaoh's own body, those crimson embers and the faint glow of hieroglyphs on the walls, which now wreathed as though alive. The pharaoh spoke, not in words, but in layered voices that filled the skull, echoing from inside rather than through the air. My oath endures. My reign continues. Blood for blood. The air grew heavy, crushing. One of the workers collapsed, blood pouring from his nose and ears. Another tried to flee but froze mid-step, his body trembling violently before he crumpled to the ground, lifeless. Daniel fell to his knees, overcome by awe and terror. Dear God, he whispered. It's true. It's all true. Nadia pulled him back. We have to leave, now. But the pharaoh's shadow stretched across the floor, long and clawed, pinning them in place. He reached toward Daniel, skeletal fingers dripping with thick, black-red ichor. Daniel's body went rigid. His veins bulged, darkening under his skin as though ink spread through them. The pharaoh's voice coiled into his mind. You are chosen. Your blood will carry my name into eternity. With a sudden force, Nadia slammed her amulet against Daniel's chest. A burst of golden light erupted, severing the shadow's grip. Daniel gasped for air, clutching his throat. The pharaoh hissed, recoiling from the light. His body blurred, becoming mist and shadow, then reforming, towering over them. He no longer resembled a man but a storm of black smoke bound by strips of golden armor. The chamber walls cracked as if the very temple groaned in protest. Sand poured in through fissures, and torches blew out one by one. They fled into the outer corridor, the surviving assistants stumbling in blind terror. Behind them, the pharaoh's voice thundered through the halls. There is no escape. The oath binds the living and the dead alike. The curse spreads. The desert outside had changed. The night sky glowed crimson, lightning splitting across clouds that had not been there before. The air smelled of iron and rot. The camp was in chaos, supplies overturned, camels braying wildly, men fleeing into the dunes. But none escaped far. Dark shapes moved among the tents, mummified figures, their wrappings stained with blood, animated by the pharaoh's will. The dead had risen. One worker was dragged screaming into the sand, skeletal hands clutching his ankles. Another fired a rifle, but the bullet passed clean through a mummy, which continued forward unyielding. Daniel and Nadia fought their way through the madness, ducking into a collapsed tent. Daniel's hands shook violently. We unleashed him, God help us, we unleashed him. Nadia's face was grim but resolute. She pulled a scroll from her satchel, one of the hidden parchments they had found in the tomb's side chamber. This was left by the priests who bound him. They knew he would rise again. They left instructions. Daniel's eyes widened. Instructions. To destroy him. To bind him again. Nadia unrolled the scroll, revealing ink drawings of blood-red rituals and hieroglyphs of sacrifice. The blood oath cannot be killed. It was made with the gods of the underworld. But it can be broken. Only the blood of a royal descendant, freely given in sacrifice, can end it. Daniel stared at her. Royal blood. But we don't. Nadia met his eyes, her voice quiet but steady. My family descends from the priests who overthrew him. The scrolls say our line was chosen as guardians. My blood is the key. Daniel shook his head violently. No, there has to be another way. There isn't, Nadia said firmly. That's why I was meant to find this tomb. This isn't an accident. This is my duty. Thunder rolled overhead, unnatural and deafening. The pharaoh's shadow swept across the dunes, blotting out the moonlight. His form towered above the desert, a colossal silhouette of smoke and blood. All around them, the dead clawed from the sand, answering his call. An army of mummified soldiers, his legion reborn. The pharaoh's temptation. That night, Daniel dreamed again. He stood in a throne room of obsidian and fire. The forgotten pharaoh sat on a throne of skulls, his eyes glowing like molten coals. The pharaoh's voice filled the air. Why bind me, when you could join me? I offer eternity, power beyond death. The world will kneel again, as it once did. You, Daniel Ashford, will be my herald. The world will know your name forever. Daniel's knees buckled. The promise burned in his veins. Immortality, recognition. He had spent his entire life chasing history's shadow. This was his chance to become it. But then he saw Nadia, bound in chains at the pharaoh's feet, her blood dripping into a chalice. The pharaoh drank, his body becoming more whole, more alive. And Daniel realized, the pharaoh's eternity was not life, but hunger. An endless feast of blood and sacrifice. Daniel woke, drenched in sweat, gasping. Nadia sat nearby, her face weary but strong. We don't have much time, she whispered. The scrolls say his power grows each night until the full moon. By then, he'll be unstoppable. Daniel clenched his fists. For the first time, his obsession with discovery wavered. He wasn't looking at a treasure. He was looking at a monster. The Legion of the Dead. By the following day, the valley was unrecognizable. Black storms circled above, blotting out the sun. The air shimmered with heat though the wind was freezing. All around the tomb, the risen dead stood guard, their hollow eyes glowing faint red, awaiting their master's command. Daniel and Nadia made their way back into the tomb, clutching the scrolls. If the ritual worked, it had to be performed in the chamber of binding, the very place where the pharaoh had been chained. But as they entered, they saw it was no longer empty. The pharaoh stood there, taller, stronger, his shadow flesh replaced with sinew and muscle that seemed newly formed, as though he was rebuilding his body piece by piece. He turned his burning gaze upon them. My priests failed me once. They thought chains and blood could silence a king. But I endured. And now, he raised a hand, and the chains that had once bound his sarcophagus slithered like serpents across the floor. I will reign again. Mummified guards stepped forward, their rusted blades gleaming. Daniel and Nadia tightened the grip on the scrolls. There was no running now. No escape. The final battle for the world of the living had begun. The final sacrifice. The chamber shook as the pharaoh advanced, his towering form filling the space like a storm-made flesh. Every step he took rattled the stones, sending cascades of dust raining down. The glow of his eyes lit the walls, casting long shadows that danced like serpents. Nadia gripped the scroll tightly, whispering the incantation under her breath. The words cut her throat like blades, ancient syllables not meant for mortal tongues. The air vibrated with each line she spoke. The pharaoh's laugh was thunderous. Priest's blood again. Do you think your frail words can bind me? The gods themselves bowed when I spoke my oath. I am eternal. He raised his hand, and the mummified guards surged forward. Daniel drew a torch from the wall and swung it desperately, flames cutting arcs through the air. The dried wrappings of the undead caught fire, but they did not stop, reaching with skeletal fingers. Daniel shoved one back into the stone, the impact shattering brittle bones, but three more pressed forward. Nadia, he shouted. Faster. Nadia's voice grew louder, stronger, as if the ancient words gave her power. The hieroglyphs along the walls glowed red, then gold, then blinding white. The chains that had slumbered for centuries began to writhe again, slinking across the ground like living snakes. The pharaoh roared, striking the floor with his fist. A shockwave blasted through the chamber, throwing Daniel against the wall. His torch flew from his grip, sputtering out. Nadia fell to her knees, blood dripping from her nose, but she clutched the scroll tighter. The pharaoh's voice coiled into Daniel's mind again. Join me, and I will spare you. Defy me, and you will wander eternity as dust and ash. Daniel's vision blurred. Images flashed, himself seated beside the pharaoh, a crown of gold on his head, nations kneeling before him. But then another image cut through, Nadia, bound in chains, her blood spilling endlessly. He shook his head violently. No, I won't serve you. Daniel grabbed a jagged shard of stone and hurled it at the pharaoh. It bounced harmlessly off his chest, but it broke the vision. The pharaoh snarled, turning his full wrath upon Daniel. A storm of shadow and flame lashed out, slamming him into the wall again. Daniel coughed blood, barely clinging to consciousness. Nadia screamed his name but forced herself to continue chanting. The final line of the incantation burned her throat. The scroll in her hands caught fire, disintegrating into ash as the spell neared completion. The chains on the ground surged upward, wrapping around the pharaoh's limbs. He bellowed in fury, thrashing, but the more he fought, the tighter they grew. No, I am eternal, my oath is blood, and blood is forever. Nadia dropped the last of the scroll. Her hands trembled as she drew a ceremonial dagger from her satchel. Her eyes glistened with tears as she looked at Daniel. The blood of the guardian, she whispered. It has to be given. Daniel shook his head weakly. No, please, don't. But Nadia only smiled, a soft, sad smile. This is why I was born, Daniel. To end him. Before he could move, she drove the dagger into her own palm, letting the blood drip onto the chains that bound the pharaoh. The chains blazed with golden fire, hissing as they tightened around the monster. The pharaoh screamed, a sound like mountains shattering, the agony of eternity undone. His form convulsed, the shadow tearing from his body, the blood and sinew crumbling to ash. The chamber quaked violently. Sand poured through the cracks, the ceiling groaning. Daniel crawled toward Nadia, catching her as she collapsed. Her skin was pale, her blood soaking into the stone. You can't leave me, he begged. You can't. Nadia's hand touched his face. Promise me, you'll tell the world the truth. Not of treasure, not of glory, but of sacrifice, of what must never be awoken again. Her hand fell limp, her eyes closed. The chains dragged the pharaoh's remains back into the sarcophagus, sealing it shut. The lid slammed down, the sound echoing like thunder. The hieroglyphs burned one final time, then dimmed, leaving only silence. The storm outside faded. The dead crumbled into dust, the crimson sky returning to black. Daniel stumbled from the tomb, clutching Nadia's body, tears streaming down his face. When he finally reached the surface, the desert was quiet. Stars glittered above, untouched by the chaos that had raged below. He buried her there, under the sands of the valley, marking her grave with the amulet she had carried. And then, broken but resolute, he walked into the night, vowing to carry her story, and the warning she had given her life to protect. Epilogue. Years later, explorers whispered of Daniel Ashford, the man who returned from the desert with eyes that seemed older than time. He never sought fame, never published his findings, but in quiet corners of dusty libraries, he would tell the tale of the blood oath. Most dismissed it as madness, a myth, a tale spun from heat and hallucination. But in the valley of the forgotten pharaoh, beneath the ever-shifting sands, the sarcophagus still rests. The chains hold, the oath sleeps.